A
Hold
storm
on, boy,
rolled
hold
across
on.
the prairie, thick and heavy, pounding against the windows of Evelyn Carter's old ranch house. She stood in the yellow glow of her kitchen, one hand clutching a chipped mug, the other resting absently
No,
on the
don't you
counter.
quit! Not after
The
all
wind
this!
howled, rattling loose boards. Rain slashed sideways, painting ghostly rivers on the glass. In that moment, Evelyn saw her own reflection, deep lines etching the corners of her eyes. Her hair
You're
streaked
a
silver,
fighter,
her jaw set tight. She
just
barely
like me.
recognized the woman she'd become. 3 years had slipped by since Thomas died, but the ache hadn't softened. If anything, it had grown sharper, settling into the bones of the house, turning every echo into a memory, every silence into a wound. Her days were carved by routine. Feed the chickens, patch the fences, circle through endless chores. Her only conversations were with the wind, the rain, or the old photo of Thomas that hung above the mantel. Tonight, though, something felt different. The storm was a wild, living thing. It woke Evelyn out of her numbness and called her back to the present. She set her mug down and wandered to the living room, settling into Thomas's old armchair. The fabric still held his scent, a trace of leather and tobacco. She closed her eyes. In her dream, Thomas stood before her, young and laughing, his eyes crinkling at the corners. His voice was clear as thunder. "You're still here, Evie. You're alive. Find what matters. Don't let the darkness swallow you. There's more out there, something waiting. Just say yes." She reached for him, but he faded into mist. Evelyn jerked awake, heart pounding. The storm had quieted, replaced by a gentle patter of rain. She rose, her breath unsteady, and padded to the window. The fields glimmered in the dawn, mist curling above the grass. By mid-morning, Evelyn drove her battered old pickup down the muddy road into town. The world looked washed clean. At the diner, she nursed a black coffee, only half listening to the buzz of conversation. The talk was of cattle prices, broken fences, the coming spring. She heard her neighbor Mrs. Flanagan mutter about the upcoming horse auction, another round of unwanted animals, most of them with nowhere to go. Evelyn tried to ignore it, but something tugged at her, some invisible thread. On a whim, she left the coffee shop and made her way to the auction yard, boots splashing in puddles. The place was buzzing, a mix of ranchers, wranglers, and a few lost souls looking for a bargain or a bit of hope. Evelyn kept to the shadows, watching as horse after horse was trotted out for inspection. Some were glossy, prancing, the pride of their breeders. Others were rough, nervous, their fates uncertain. Then, in the far pen, she saw him, a young, dark bay colt, scrawny as a stray, his coat patchy and dull. He hung his head low, eyes half-lidded, ribs showing through mud-caked fur. The other horses avoided him, and a couple of kids pointed, laughing. "He's barely standing," one rancher snorted. "That one won't last a week. Look at those legs, can't even carry himself." The auctioneer barely glanced his way, already calling out bids for a flashy chestnut nearby. But Evelyn couldn't look away. The colt raised his head for just a second, and their eyes met. There was something there, a depth, a question, a silent plea. She felt it like a lightning strike. All around her, the world faded to a hush. She saw Thomas in her mind again. Find what matters. Just say yes. Evelyn moved forward, squeezing through the crowd. "What's his story?" she asked the wrangler. The man shrugged. "Found him by the old railroad track. Half-starved. No brand. Ain't got much chance, lady. He's next to nothing." The auctioneer called for bids. No one answered. There was an awkward silence, and a few ranchers shifted their feet. Evelyn felt her heart hammering. She glanced at her hands, rough and capable but shaking. She remembered the dream. Thomas's words echoed again. Before she could talk herself out of it, her voice rang out. "I'll take him." Heads turned. Mrs. Flanagan gasped. A couple of young cowboys snickered. The auctioneer blinked, then shrugged. Sold to Evelyn Carter. The gavel hit. Just like that, she'd made her choice. Evelyn felt the eyes of the whole town on her as she signed the papers. She tried to stand tall, but her legs wobbled beneath her. The wrangler led the colt to her. Up close, she could see the raw sores on his legs, the filth in his mane, the white of fear in his eyes. Still, he didn't fight. He just stood, waiting. She whispered, "I'll call you Chance." As she led him toward the trailer, voices trailed after her. "She's lost her mind, wasting her money on a lost cause. Old Widow Carter always was a little touched." Evelyn kept her eyes forward. She didn't look back. On the drive home, thunder rumbled far off, and the world felt wide open, uncertain. Evelyn glanced at the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the colt's dark eyes peering through the bars. Something flickered there. Not hope exactly, but not surrender either. By the time she got back to the ranch, rain had turned the yard to slick red mud. She coaxed Chance from the trailer, her voice low and steady, letting him take each step at his own pace. He stumbled once, nearly fell, but she caught him, bracing his thin frame with her own body. Inside the barn, she made a soft bed of hay, filled a bucket with fresh water, and placed a blanket over his trembling back. She watched as he sniffed the hay, then nibbled, unsure. Outside, the storm had passed. The world was quiet. Evelyn leaned against the stall door, exhaustion and adrenaline mingling in her veins. She realized she was smiling, a small, crooked smile she hadn't felt in years. "Welcome home, Chance," she whispered. Above them, the rafters creaked, and the old cowboy hat still hung on its hook, casting a shadow across the barn floor. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn didn't feel entirely alone. She turned and caught her reflection in the barn window. The woman looking back at her was still a stranger, but tonight there was a spark in her eyes, a glimmer of something fierce and new. She didn't know if she could save this horse. She didn't know if she could save herself. But for the first time in years, Evelyn Carter was willing to try. The sun was barely above the rooftops when Evelyn led Chance out of the battered horse trailer and into his new home. The ranch yard was still slick with mud, puddles shimmering like silver coins. Evelyn's hands trembled as she guided the weak colt through the gate, feeling every bone in his body beneath her palm. Chance hesitated at first, snorting softly, his ears twitching at each unfamiliar sound. But when Evelyn spoke to him, quietly, gently, he took a few tentative steps forward. Word travels fast in small towns, and Evelyn's decision at the auction was the only thing on everyone's lips by sunrise. Before she'd finished brushing the mud from Chance's coat, old Mr. Ray came rattling down the road in his pickup, engine coughing and backfiring. "Evelyn! You really went and bought that scrawny colt?" he called, climbing out with the stiffness of years spent in the saddle. She straightened, wiping her hands on her jeans. "He deserved a chance, Ray. Don't we all?" Ray peered at the colt, shaking his head. "Looks half dead. Folks at the diner say you got soft since Thomas passed. That horse, he's not worth the feed you'll spend on him." Evelyn bristled, but she swallowed her retort. I don't expect you to understand. Ray just grunted. Don't say I didn't warn you. By mid-morning, the town's curiosity had grown into a steady trickle of visitors. Evelyn caught glimpses of faces peering over the fence, children pressed against the slats, couples in pickup trucks parked along the road. Even Mrs. Flanagan, who usually kept to herself, stopped to gawk. Evelyn ignored the stares. She poured her energy into caring for Chance, learning the contours of his wounds, the shape of his ribs, the haunted look in his eyes. She fed him warm mash in slow spoonfuls, whispering stories of the ranch, of Thomas, of better days. Chance barely ate at first, but he watched her with wary, intelligent eyes. Every time she entered the stall, she moved slowly, letting him get used to her voice, her scent, her touch. She sang old lullabies she barely remembered, sometimes trailing off into silence when grief caught in her throat. One afternoon, as she brushed out the tangles in Chance's mane, a pair of young ranchers approached the barn, leaning against the doorframe with smirks on their faces. "Heard you picked up a real prize, Mrs. Carter," one drawled. "Town's got a bet going on how long he'll last." The other snickered. "Can't believe you spent good money on a lost cause." Evelyn didn't flinch. She met their eyes, her voice calm. "Kindness isn't a gamble. It's a choice." The ranchers shrugged, muttering as they left. Evelyn stroked Chance's neck. "People can be cruel when they're afraid," she whispered. Chance's ears flicked. For a fleeting moment, his muzzle brushed her hand, a tiny, trembling act of trust that sent a rush of warmth through her. Days passed, each one a test of patience and faith. The weather turned clear but cold. Every morning, Evelyn found new cuts to clean, new signs of sickness to watch for. She slept little, always half awake, listening for any sign of distress. One night, a pack of coyotes howled at the moon. Chance stamped nervously in his stall, sweat darkening his thin flanks. Evelyn hurried out in her robe, wrapping her arms around his neck until the world was quiet again. In those long hours, she remembered Thomas's voice, steady and reassuring. Sometimes you just have to keep showing up, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. The auction had changed her. It was as if, by rescuing Chance, she was rescuing a part of herself, a part that still believed in hope, in miracles, in stubborn faith. One morning, Evelyn led Chance out into the weak spring sunlight. His steps were shaky, but he moved with new purpose, head higher than before. Townspeople slowed their trucks as they passed, some shaking their heads, others watching with silent curiosity. A little girl named Molly stopped by after school, her hair in braids and freckles bright against her cheeks. "Can I pet him, Mrs. Carter?" she asked, her eyes wide. Evelyn nodded. "Be gentle now." Molly reached out and Chance shied away at first, but when Evelyn spoke softly, the colt stood still, allowing the girl's small hand to rest on his muzzle. Molly grinned. "He's not scary at all," she declared. Evelyn smiled for the first time that day. "He's just misunderstood." By the end of the week, the whole town knew about Evelyn and her broken colt. Some came to offer help, others just to gossip. Whispers followed her everywhere. At the feed store, the diner, church on Sunday. Some said she was wasting her time. Others said she was brave. But late at night, when the ranch was quiet and the sky stretched endless above her, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years. A spark of pride, a sense of belonging to the world again. She sat by Chance's stall, humming low and slow, while the colt dozed beside her. She traced the stars through the cracks in the barn roof, thinking of Thomas, of dreams left behind, and of all the second chances that life, sometimes, could offer. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose boards. Inside, Evelyn and Chance rested in a fragile peace, both battered but undefeated, watched over by the silent, curious gaze of the town. Days bled quietly into weeks, and the ranch seemed to slip into a gentler rhythm. Gone was the chaos of the auction, the pointed looks from passing trucks, and the whispers at the diner. Instead, the world narrowed to a simple duet, Evelyn and Chance, each mending their own wounds in the cool quiet of the barn. Morning light streamed through cracks in the old wood, casting golden stripes across the hay-strewn floor. Evelyn rose before dawn every day, shrugging on Thomas's old jacket and shoving her feet into weathered boots. Each time she approached Chance's stall, she moved slow and steady, letting her presence fill the space like sunlight, soft and non-threatening. Chance was still so thin it hurt to look at him, his ribs like pale shadows, hips sharp as fence posts. But there was a spark in him now, a flicker of something stubborn. He no longer shrank from Evelyn's touch. When she knelt to clean the sores on his legs, he stood still, only twitching an ear now and then. One morning, as she hummed a melody from years ago, she felt a gentle weight against her shoulder. Chance's head had lowered, his warm breath sighing against her cheek. Evelyn smiled, brushing his forelock aside. "You're braver than you look. You know that?" Their days took on a gentle repetition. Evelyn cleaned wounds with salt water, spread ointment on cracked skin, and spoke to Chance about anything and everything. The old days with Thomas, her favorite wildflowers, the stubborn rooster who never learned to crow at sunrise. Sometimes her voice wavered, drifting into memories, but she kept talking anyway. There was comfort in the sound, a fragile tether keeping her rooted to the present. At night, after the last chores were finished and the barn was washed in moonlight, Evelyn would bring a chair to the stall and sit with Chance. She read aloud from faded books, or simply sat in silence, letting the steady rhythm of the horse's breathing ease the ache in her chest. Sometimes, exhausted, she would doze off, waking to find Chance standing watch over her. The town watched from a distance. Skeptics were everywhere, at the feed store, church, the grocery line, but their curiosity was shifting. People began to ask, "How's that colt coming along?" instead of, "Why bother?" Little Molly, the girl with the braids, came by most afternoons, shyly offering carrots or apples. Her laughter filled the barn, and for a few moments made it feel like a home again. Chance, though still frail, started to change in tiny ways that only Evelyn seemed to notice. He lifted his head when she entered the barn. His ears perked at the sound of her voice, and his eyes followed her around the yard. There were setbacks, a night of chills that left him shivering, a stubborn cough that wouldn't quite leave. But each time, Evelyn stayed by his side, refusing to give in to despair. One chilly evening, Evelyn found herself telling Chance a story she hadn't spoken aloud in years. "Thomas was always the brave one," she murmured, stroking the colt's neck. "He was the kind of man who'd chase a thunderstorm if it meant bringing in the herd. When I lost him, well, I thought the world ended. But you remind me that endings aren't always the end. Sometimes they're the beginning." Chance blinked, as if he understood. His muzzle nudged her arm, searching for another treat. Evelyn laughed softly, her voice echoing in the high rafters. For the first time, it didn't sound lonely. The spring air slowly warmed, and with it, a hint of hope took root. Grass grew thick and green along the fence line. The river swelled with melted snow, singing softly as it passed. Each day, Evelyn led Chance outside for a slow walk along the pasture. He stumbled at first, his legs shaky, but grew stronger with every step. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the sky blazed orange, a few townsfolk lingered at the edge of the property, watching. Evelyn pretended not to notice, focusing on Chance as he tried to nibble at a clump of clover. The tension that once crackled in the air now felt softer, replaced by quiet curiosity. Inside, Evelyn kept a routine of gentle encouragement. She'd sing lullabies Thomas had loved, letting her voice drift through the barn like a prayer. Sometimes she cried, silent tears slipping down her cheeks, but Chance never turned away. He stood beside her, a silent witness to her grief. As the days grew longer, Evelyn realized she'd begun to heal alongside Chance. The wounds in her heart were still there, but they didn't hurt quite as much. She found herself looking forward to each new sunrise, to every small milestone the colt achieved. There was a kind of magic in the ordinary, feeding, grooming, even mucking out the stalls. One night, as a warm breeze whispered through the open window, Evelyn whispered to Chance, "We're not alone, you and I. Maybe we never really were." Chance flicked his tail and settled into the straw, eyes closing in contentment. Evelyn sat beside him, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The ranch was quiet, peaceful, two broken souls, learning to trust, to hope, and slowly, to love again. Outside, the stars shone bright over the endless prairie, watching over Evelyn and Chance as they began to believe in second chances. Spring brought the world back to life in small, careful ways. Yellow wildflowers crept along the fence posts, and the orchard filled with the soft buzz of bees. In the house, sunlight made patterns on the worn floorboards, but it couldn't quite chase away the shadows that lingered in the corners of Evelyn's memory. One morning, after tending to Chance, his wounds slowly healing, his eyes brighter, Evelyn decided to clean the attic. It was a chore she'd put off for years, daunted by the dust, the cobwebs, and the weight of too many memories packed into cardboard boxes. She hauled a chair under the pull-down ladder, climbed up, and entered the dim, stifling space beneath the eaves. Everything up there smelled of mothballs, old leather, and time. Boxes were stacked along the beams, some bursting with Thomas's old clothes, shirts she'd sewn patches on, boots that still bore the imprint of his stride. She almost left, overcome by the ache in her chest, but something compelled her forward. Near the window, buried beneath a blanket, Evelyn found an old wooden box, its lid carved with a clumsy heart and the initials TC. She ran her fingers over the smooth, familiar shape, and her breath caught. With trembling hands, she carried it down to the kitchen and sat at the table, her heart pounding in her ears. Inside the box were letters, dozens of them, all addressed in Thomas's rough handwriting. Some were yellowed with age, edges curled. She unfolded the first one, the paper soft as old cloth. "My Evie," it began, "you were the light at the end of every hard day. I hope you'll keep loving even when I'm gone. Don't close your heart, not to the land, not to the folks who need you. Most of all, don't close it to yourself. Keep living. Promise me you will." Evelyn pressed the letter to her lips, tears sliding down her cheeks. She read each one slowly, as if the words could mend something broken inside her. Thomas's love spilled out in every line, a stubborn faith in the goodness of life, a reminder that giving was what made her strongest. She didn't notice the sun setting or the kitchen growing dim around her. The world outside faded into shadow, but the letters glowed in the lamplight like gold. That night, the house creaked more than usual. The wind rattled the shutters, and floorboards groaned as if someone was walking the halls. Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, clutching a letter to her chest. In the dark, she saw the silhouette of Thomas's old cowboy hat hanging on its peg by the door, its brim tilted just the way he'd worn it. A sudden chill swept over her, prickling her skin. She listened, half expecting to hear boots on the stairs, the low rumble of Thomas's laugh. She almost called out his name, but stopped herself, feeling foolish. But she wasn't the only one sensing something strange. In the barn, Chance whinnied softly, his ears flicking as if he saw someone moving in the shadows. When Evelyn came to check on him, she found the colt standing perfectly still, staring into the dark corner of the stall. She stroked his neck, murmuring to calm him, but her own heart thudded with unease. The days that followed were filled with small, unexplained happenings. Once, she found Thomas's hat on the kitchen table, though she was certain she hadn't touched it. Another time, she heard a door close gently in the night, but every room was empty. Instead of frightening her, these moments became a comfort, a gentle reminder that Thomas was still part of the world she moved through. She began to talk to him again, aloud, sharing the little victories and the setbacks, as if he were just out of sight. With Chance, she was more open than ever. One afternoon, as rain drummed gently on the barn roof, she sat beside his stall and poured out everything she'd kept bottled up. She told him about the loneliness, about missing Thomas so fiercely it sometimes felt like drowning, about her fear that she'd never be whole again. Chance listened, his deep brown eyes never leaving hers. Evelyn cried, long and hard, her tears soaking the straw. When she finished, exhausted and hollowed out, Chance stepped forward, pressing his nose against her shoulder. The simple touch was enough. For the first time, she allowed herself to grieve openly, no longer ashamed of her pain. In the quiet that followed, Evelyn noticed that the barn felt warmer. The air was thick with the scent of hay, horses, and something softer. Love, maybe, or forgiveness. The ghosts she'd carried inside her chest for so long seemed lighter. That night, she brought one of Thomas's letters to the barn and read it aloud by lantern light. Chance listened, ears flicking, and when she finished, she tucked the letter into her pocket. She pressed her hand to his forehead and whispered, "We're going to make it, you and me. I know it now." Spring deepened, and the ranch changed, subtly but surely. The wind no longer sounded like weeping. The old house, with its creaking floors and shadowy corners, became a place of memory and hope, not just loss. Evelyn carried Thomas's words in her heart, letting them guide her through each day. And in the barn, Chance grew stronger, steadier, comforted by the gentle presence of the woman who, at last, allowed herself to feel it all. Together, they faced the ghosts. Together, they began to heal. It was early Sunday morning when Evelyn heard the old Ford rumbling down her driveway. She set down her mug and glanced through the window, already guessing who it was. The engine cut off with a cough, and a few seconds later, Mr. Mackenzie stepped onto the porch, boots thumping heavily against the planks. He was a tall man with sun-baked skin and thick silver hair under a battered Stetson. He'd run cattle on the next ranch for decades, outliving 3 wives and too many horses to count. His reputation was one of hard wisdom, never cruel but never sentimental. Evelyn met him at the screen door. "Morning, Bill," she greeted quietly. He nodded, eyes scanning her face, then drifting past her shoulder to the barn. "Heard talk in town," he said, voice rough as gravel. "That horse of yours. Folks say you're working miracles." Evelyn tried to smile. "I don't know about miracles. Just doing my best." Bill grunted, shifting his weight. "You know, I've seen good people throw their hearts away on lost causes. Sometimes it's braver to let go." She bristled, but she kept her voice even. "He deserves a chance, Bill. Don't we all?" He looked at her, eyes narrowing. "Some things can't be fixed. No shame in admitting it. If that colt's suffering—" Evelyn cut him off, sharper than she meant. "He's not just some animal to me, he's—" She stopped, breathing in slow. "He's family now." Bill shook his head, softening a little. "You were always stubborn, Evelyn. Even Thomas couldn't change that." He didn't press further, but the warning hung between them like a storm cloud. After he left, Evelyn lingered on the porch, fists clenched at her sides. She could still feel the weight of his doubt pressing on her shoulders. Later that afternoon, she went out to the barn with a tray of warm mash and a new blanket for Chance. The colt was dozing in the straw, but his ears flicked when she entered. She brushed him gently, her mind replaying Bill's words. "You're wasting your time. That horse is doomed." Evelyn's jaw set. "You don't get to decide who's doomed, Bill Mackenzie," she muttered under her breath. She fed Chance, then led him into the paddock for some gentle exercise. He moved better than he had a week ago, but there was still a tremor in his steps. Evelyn watched him carefully, searching for any sign of pain. When he stumbled, she caught him, steadying his legs. As the sun dipped lower, the temperature dropped fast. Clouds gathered over the mountains, painting the sky a bruised purple. Evelyn led Chance back into the barn, tucking the blanket over his back, and sat with him while the wind picked up. Night settled quickly, bringing a chill that crept through every crack and seam of the old house. Evelyn built a fire, but sleep would not come. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind moan and the house creak. Her mind a whirl of worry. Then, midnight. A noise jolted her awake. She sat up, heart pounding, certain she'd heard a whinny, faint but urgent, from the barn. She threw on her boots and rushed outside. The barn door banged in the wind, and inside, the lantern flickered wildly. Chance was on his side, legs thrashing, his body drenched in sweat. He was burning up, his breathing ragged, eyes rolling in panic. "No." Evelyn dropped to her knees, hands trembling as she felt his forehead. He was hot, far too hot. Fever. It struck terror through her heart. "Hold on, boy. Hold on," she pleaded. She moved on instinct, running for water, towels, anything to cool him. She soaked cloths in cold water and pressed them to his neck, sides, and under his belly. All the while she whispered encouragement, voice trembling but steady. "I'm here, Chance. You're not alone. Don't give up on me now." The hours stretched, every minute dragging with fear. The fever showed no mercy, rising and falling in unpredictable waves. Evelyn wiped sweat from Chance's muzzle and prayed to anyone who would listen. Thomas, the Lord, the ghosts in the rafters. Lightning flickered on the horizon. Rain pelted the roof, and the storm's rage matched her own desperation. In her exhaustion, she nearly missed the moment when Chance's shivers grew violent, his legs kicking so hard that he slammed against the stall wall. Evelyn sobbed, half with terror, half with fury. "No, don't you quit! Not after all this!" As the storm roared, Evelyn's mind raced with memories, Thomas's steady hands on a sick foal, his voice calm in the face of disaster. She tried to channel his strength, refusing to leave Chance's side. Sometime near dawn, with the wind still shrieking and her hands raw from wringing cloths, Evelyn slumped against the stall wall, utterly spent. She didn't know if Chance would make it. She only knew that if hope was measured by effort, then she had given everything. As the first light crept through the cracks, she lifted her head. Chance was breathing, barely, but the wild panic in his eyes had dulled. She pressed her forehead to his and whispered, "You're a fighter, just like Thomas was, just like me." In the exhausted quiet, Evelyn knew that her faith and Chance's life were now balanced on a razor's edge, and in the house, Thomas's old hat sat quietly on its hook, shadow stretched long by the dawn, as if the man himself was keeping watch and waiting for morning. The barn was thick with shadows and cold as a stone cellar. Evelyn knelt beside Chance, exhaustion a weight in her bones. Her hands, raw from working through the night, never left the trembling colt's side. Outside, the storm had eased to a steady, cold rain that tapped on the roof like 1,000 anxious fingers. Inside, the only sound was Chance's ragged breathing and Evelyn's whispered encouragement. She had never known a night could feel so endless. Hours crawled by in the shifting dark, minutes stretching, heartbeats stuttering, hope flickering in and out with every shudder of Chance's thin chest. Every so often, a gust of wind rattled the walls and made the lantern sway, its yellow light dancing across the worn rafters. Evelyn was numb with fear. She dipped a cloth into the cool water again and wrung it out, pressing it gently along Chance's neck and flanks. His body burned with fever. Sometimes he thrashed, muscles jerking, and she'd have to brace herself against his frantic kicks. Other times, he went frighteningly still, his sides barely moving, and Evelyn held her breath, terrified of the quiet. "Don't leave me," she thought, blinking back tears, her mind a jumble of prayer and memory. "Not now. Not when you've come so far." Her own voice surprised her as she spoke aloud. "You're stronger than you think, Chance. You just have to hold on. Please." Time seemed to bend in that cold, echoing barn. Evelyn's thoughts drifted, half dream, half waking memory, back to Thomas. She remembered nights when he'd stayed up with a sick calf, the way he'd murmur soft encouragement, the way his hand would settle warm and steady on her shoulder if she faltered. Tonight, with her forehead pressed to Chance's neck, she swore she felt that presence, a faint warmth behind her, the scent of old leather and pipe tobacco threading through the hay. For a moment she imagined Thomas kneeling beside her, his hand resting gently on her back. "You're not alone, Evie," she heard, clear as a bell in the hush. "Keep going. He needs you, just like you needed me." She blinked hard, not sure if she was awake or dreaming. The barn felt different now, charged, as if something unseen stood guard. Even Chance seemed to sense it, the way his ears twitched, the way his frightened eyes searched the shadows, almost as if he saw someone she could not. Midnight blurred into dawn. Evelyn's vision blurred too, her body screaming for rest, her soul refusing to surrender. She hummed quietly, the same lullabies she'd sung for Thomas in happier years. She told Chance stories of springtime and green grass, of hope and new beginnings. Her voice cracked, but she kept speaking. At last, as gray light crept through the high windows, something shifted. Chance's breathing, wild and shallow, began to slow. His muscles unclenched. His head lolled against her arm. Evelyn leaned closer, searching his face for any sign. His eyes fluttered open just for a moment and settled on hers. A rush of relief swept over her so strong it nearly buckled her knees. "You made it, boy," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You held on." Chance's eyes closed again, but this time his breath was slow and even. His fever had broken. Evelyn could feel it. The crisis had passed. She sagged against the stall wall, sobbing into her hands. Her entire body ached. Still, she forced herself up, fetched a clean blanket, and tucked it around Chance's shivering form. She brushed his tangled forelock aside, pressing her lips to his damp forehead. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "I knew you could do it." In the stillness, the barn seemed to breathe with her. Morning sunlight poured through the window, lighting up dust motes and painting gold on the old boards. The world outside was washed clean. Evelyn felt as if she too had survived something sacred. For a while she just sat there, her back against the wood, her hand resting on Chance's side as he drifted into peaceful sleep. Every now and then, she'd close her eyes and drift, dreaming half-dreams of Thomas's smile, of warm hands guiding hers, of a second chance not just for a colt, but for herself. When the sun was fully up, Evelyn forced herself to her feet. She fed the chickens, checked the fences, moving like a ghost through her chores, her mind still half in the barn. At last, she brewed herself coffee and took it out to the porch, staring at the blue mountains and the wild green of her land. She wondered if the town would ever understand what had happened that night. Maybe it didn't matter. All that mattered was the stubborn spark in Chance's eyes when he'd looked at her, the trust that had survived sickness and doubt. That afternoon, she called the vet, who marveled at Chance's recovery. "It's a miracle," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. Evelyn just smiled, a secret tucked inside her chest. She knew what it meant to survive the night, to refuse to let go, to trust that hope, no matter how fragile, could carry you through even the darkest hours. As dusk fell, Evelyn returned to the barn. Chance lifted his head, ears forward, a question in his eyes. She knelt beside him and stroked his neck, her voice soft as promise. "We're still here, you and me. We made it." Outside, the rain had stopped. A rainbow arched across the horizon, bright against the fading storm. In that quiet, Evelyn let herself hope, not just for Chance, but for herself, for the first time in years. After the fever broke, something new settled over the ranch, a feeling Evelyn hadn't known in years. It wasn't just relief, but a slow, stubborn hope. The winter's darkness faded. Chance, once nothing more than a trembling shadow in the barn, grew stronger each day. And Evelyn found herself waking up eager to see what the morning would bring. Each dawn, she opened the big red doors of the barn and led Chance out into the golden light. He was still thin, his scars clear to anyone who looked, but his coat was coming back with a healthy sheen, and there was a light in his eyes, a bold, curious spark. Evelyn began walking him farther each day, sometimes along the edge of the creek, sometimes to the pasture where Thomas's old horse had once run wild. At first, every step was slow, cautious, but soon Chance began to anticipate the walks, even tugging playfully at the lead rope. One morning, as she brushed his coat, she noticed how his head lifted at the sound of her voice. He nickered when she entered the barn. He let her rub the bridge of his nose, and on sunny days, he would toss his head and prance, startling the chickens and making Evelyn laugh out loud. Word of Chance's recovery drifted through town like the sweet scent of spring lilacs. Neighbors who had once doubted or whispered now drove by more slowly, pausing to watch as Evelyn led the colt around the paddock. Mrs. Flanagan, who'd once called her a fool, showed up at the gate one afternoon with a basket of fresh bread and a shy apology. "I didn't think he'd make it," she confessed, eyes softening as she watched Chance graze. Evelyn just smiled. Sometimes we all need a second look. Soon, kids started appearing at the fence line. Molly was the first, brave as always. With her braids flying and hands full of apples, she'd spend hours sitting on the fence, talking to Chance in a high, cheerful voice, her giggles echoing through the barn. One Saturday, Molly brought a friend, Sam, a thin, quiet boy from the edge of town. Sam hung back at first, but when Evelyn handed him a curry comb, he accepted it with wide eyes. Under her gentle instruction, he brushed Chance's coat in long, careful strokes, never speaking but smiling each time the horse turned to look at him. The news spread. Parents came by with their children, asking shyly if Evelyn might show them how to care for a horse. It started as a favor for a few neighbors, but soon Evelyn found herself opening the gates every Saturday morning for anyone who wanted to learn. She taught them how to hold out a flat palm for feeding, how to read the flick of an ear, how to move slowly and speak gently. Chance became the heart of every lesson, a living testament to patience, trust, and resilience. At first, the ranchers who'd once mocked her watched from a distance, arms folded. But as the weeks passed, their skepticism softened. Some even offered to help mend a fence or haul hay. One by one, they stopped by the barn to see for themselves what Evelyn had managed to do. "That's a fine-looking colt," Mr. Ray admitted one evening, shaking his head in wonder. "I never thought he'd come this far." Evelyn just nodded, her pride too big for words. The real change, though, came with the children. They flocked to the ranch, some shy, some wild, some carrying scars as old as Chance's. One little boy, a foster kid named Eli, clung to Evelyn's side every lesson, never speaking until the third week, when he whispered, "Can I help feed him?" "Of course," Evelyn said, guiding his hands with her own. Eli's eyes shone, and Chance, sensing the boy's uncertainty, stood perfectly still, accepting the offered treat as if he understood how much it mattered. For the first time in years, Evelyn's house was filled with laughter and noise. There were muddy boots on the porch, half-eaten cookies in the kitchen, and stories traded late into the afternoon. She started sleeping with the windows open, unafraid of the creaks and groans in the old house. The ghosts that had once haunted her seemed to step aside, replaced by the living pulse of her growing community. Chance thrived on the attention. He trotted now, sometimes even galloping a short stretch before stopping, sides heaving, as if surprised by his own strength. Evelyn knew every milestone: his first canter, the first time he allowed a child to hug his neck, the day he stood calmly for the farrier. Each one felt like a tiny miracle. As the ranch blossomed, so did Evelyn. She wore her hair loose again, hummed while she worked, and caught herself smiling for no reason at all. Sometimes, when the sun set behind the barn and the world glowed with gold and purple, she felt Thomas's presence so vividly it made her laugh and cry at once. She began to share her story about Thomas, about grief, about what it meant to give and not give up. Neighbors listened, not just to her words, but to the hope in her voice. She realized she was healing, not by forgetting her pain, but by making space for others and letting herself believe in second chances. One evening, as she locked the barn and looked out over the land, she saw Eli leading Chance to the pasture, Molly at his side. They moved slowly, heads close, both giggling about something Evelyn couldn't hear. She stood quietly, watching as the last light faded, and for the first time, she didn't feel alone on the ranch. Chance, the horse no one wanted, the one who shouldn't have survived, had become a beacon. He had mended not only his own broken spirit but hers, and those of the children and neighbors drawn into his orbit. As the stars blinked on overhead, Evelyn whispered into the dark, "Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for reminding me that life keeps going, that hope is stubborn, and that love, when given freely, can change everything." And somewhere, in the hush of the spring night, it felt as if the whole world agreed. As spring ripened into early summer, Evelyn found herself surrounded by laughter and voices. The ranch alive in a way it hadn't been since Thomas passed. But even as the days grew longer and Chance led the children in playful circles around the pasture, there remained a quiet ache, a shadow that lingered just out of sight. Some wounds, Evelyn realized, healed slowly, their edges softened by time but never truly erased. One golden afternoon, as the sky stretched cloudless and blue above the fields, Evelyn decided to clean out the old barn. Dust danced in the shafts of sunlight, and swallows darted in and out of the rafters. Chance followed her as she moved from stall to stall, poking his nose into every bucket and hay bale. The barn had become his kingdom, a place of safety and now of joy. Evelyn worked methodically, humming under her breath, sorting through old tack and forgotten tools. In a corner, she discovered a battered trunk she hadn't seen in years. Inside, folded in a yellowed feed sack, she found Thomas's old horse brush, the handle worn smooth by countless hours in his hands. Her heart skipped. She cradled it as if it were something precious, turning it over, tracing the faded initials scratched into the wood. Memories washed over her. Thomas laughing as he groomed a stubborn filly, his easy way with animals, the way he'd brush Evelyn's hair by lamplight after a long day. For a moment, she stood perfectly still, eyes closed, letting the ache and sweetness mingle in her chest. She brought the brush to Chance's stall, holding it out for him to sniff. "This belonged to Thomas," she whispered. "He'd have liked you, you know." Chance nickered, his breath warm on her hand. Evelyn smiled, blinking away tears. "I think it's time," she said, her voice soft but sure. With deliberate care, she cleaned the old brush, then used it to groom Chance. Each stroke was a quiet farewell, not just to the brush, but to the grief that had lived inside her since the day Thomas died. As she brushed, she spoke to her late husband, her words spilling out like water after a long drought. "I forgive you, and myself," she said. The admission was both heavy and light. She realized she'd blamed herself for not saving him, for not being enough to fill the emptiness that followed. She'd clung to her sorrow, afraid that letting go would mean forgetting. But as she spoke the words aloud, a weight lifted. The air in the barn changed, lighter, warmer, filled with possibility. When the chores were done, Evelyn slipped the old brush into her jacket pocket. She found Molly, Eli, and a handful of other children sitting in the grass, weaving clover chains. "Come on," she said. "Let's take Chance to the family graveyard." The small cemetery sat on a rise behind the orchard, shaded by two ancient oaks. Here, under hand-carved stones, lay Thomas and the horses they'd loved, animals saved and lost, memories engraved in weathered marble. The children walked quietly, sensing the importance of the moment. Even Chance seemed to tread more carefully, his steps measured and respectful. Evelyn knelt beside Thomas's grave and traced his name with her fingers. She placed the old brush atop the stone, a gesture of gratitude and release. "Thank you for teaching me to love fiercely," she murmured. "Thank you for showing me that forgiveness is not forgetting, but freeing yourself to live again." She closed her eyes, letting the breeze tangle her hair. The voices of the children a distant echo. For the first time she felt peace, a sense that Thomas's spirit and the love they shared were not chained to pain, but woven into the very earth beneath her feet. Just as she rose, Chance startled, snorting loudly and shying sideways. For a split second, Evelyn saw something shimmer in the light. A trick of the sun, perhaps, or a shadow moving just beyond sight. Chance bolted, galloping in wide, joyful circles around the graves. His hooves kicking up wildflowers and dust. The children cheered, laughter ringing out. Even Evelyn laughed, her heart full and light. She watched as Chance tossed his head, mane flying, his entire body alive with exuberance, a dance of pure freedom. "Go on, then," she called, tears of joy mingling with laughter. "Run! This is your world now." As the colt raced, Molly turned to Evelyn. "Do you think the horses in heaven get to run like this forever?" Evelyn knelt, hugging Molly close. "I do. And I think they're watching us right now, cheering you and Chance on." The sun was sinking low, painting the world in warm honey and shadows. The children wandered among the headstones, leaving wildflowers on each one. Eli sat quietly by the grave of a horse named Daisy, fingers tracing the carved letters. Evelyn sat beside him, sharing the silence, no longer afraid of her own memories. When the last light faded, they led Chance home. He walked beside Evelyn, calm and steady, as if some ancient burden had fallen away. She glanced at the sky. A single star twinkled in the purple dusk, and smiled, feeling Thomas's presence, not as a ghost, but as an abiding warmth. That night, after the children had gone home and the ranch was quiet, Evelyn sat on the porch, the old horse brush still warm in her hands. She breathed in the scents of hay and wildflowers, the song of crickets all around. For the first time in a long while, she felt whole, not because the pain was gone, but because she'd let it become part of her story. In the distance, Chance grazed peacefully, the very picture of second chances fulfilled. Evelyn closed her eyes, whispered one last thank you to the shadows, and let the past finally rest. With the coming of true summer, the ranch seemed to vibrate with life. The fields stretched out in waves of green, and wildflowers erupted everywhere, yellows and blues and a riot of purple. The laughter of children rang out each day, mixing with the distant lowing of cattle and the rhythmic clatter of hooves on hard-packed earth. The past, once heavy and inescapable, now felt like fertile ground for new beginnings. Chance had transformed. His coat, once dull and lifeless, now gleamed like polished mahogany in the sun. He was no longer the scrawny, uncertain colt Evelyn had rescued from the auction, but a proud leader, his head held high, every movement sure and full of purpose. When he trotted out with the herd each morning, the other horses followed his lead without question. The mare who had once bullied him now lingered at his side, and even the old gelding, cranky and set in his ways, seemed to defer to Chance's gentle authority. It wasn't just the animals who changed. Evelyn felt it too, a blooming of spirit she hadn't thought possible. She woke with energy, humming as she went about her chores, and she smiled so much her cheeks ached by evening. The pain that had haunted her, the ache of loss, the weight of regret, was still there, but it no longer defined her. Instead, it became a quiet companion, a shadow she'd learned to live with, made lighter by the warmth around her. The children flocked to the ranch, and soon their numbers grew. Word spread that Evelyn Carter's place was a haven for anyone willing to learn, work, and belong. Some came with no horse experience, others with stories of their own bruises and hardships. Evelyn never turned anyone away. She saw something of herself in each of them, a longing for connection, for acceptance, for a chance to try again. The Saturday riding lessons became a beloved ritual. Chance stood patiently as children took turns learning to guide him with gentle hands and soft words. He responded to their nervous laughter and shy encouragements, teaching them as much as they taught him. It was as if, in saving Chance, Evelyn had given the entire town permission to believe in redemption. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the world turned golden, Evelyn gathered everyone in the shade of the big sycamore by the house. She told Thomas's story, not just the romance and good years, but the hardships, the loss, the nights when she thought she would never smile again. She spoke about the rescue, about risk and failure, about forgiving yourself when things fall apart. The children listened, wide-eyed and solemn, and the adults, many of whom had known her for decades, sat quietly, some wiping away tears. She finished, "We are all worthy of a second chance. Sometimes life doesn't turn out the way we hoped, but that doesn't mean it can't be beautiful. Sometimes what seems like the end is really just a new beginning, if you're willing to reach for it." Chance, standing in the dappled sunlight, seemed to understand. He nuzzled Evelyn's hand, then wandered off to graze with the herd, his story woven now into the fabric of the ranch. From that day on, something shifted in the community. Folks who'd once kept to themselves now offered to help out, fixing fences, repairing the old hayloft, or painting the peeling barn doors. One neighbor started a garden beside the chicken coop, inviting kids to help plant beans and tomatoes. Someone else brought an old swing and hung it from the sycamore's lowest branch. The place buzzed with energy, with possibility. It was a season of healing, not just for Evelyn, but for the town itself. Where suspicion and judgment had lingered, acceptance bloomed. Where there had been loneliness, there was now shared purpose. Where fear had made people small, hope made them brave. Chance became the symbol of it all. People came from miles away to see the horse who had survived, who had led the herd, who had inspired a woman to start living again. Evelyn told his story without embellishment, never shying away from the hard parts. She spoke of darkness and doubt, of nights spent praying and days spent weeping, of the stubborn belief that even the most broken souls could mend. Her courage opened hearts. A woman who'd lost her husband to illness started volunteering at the ranch, helping with the chores and sharing stories of her own grief. A retired teacher began tutoring children in the shade of the barn. Even Bill Mackenzie, who had once warned Evelyn to give up, came by one afternoon with a shy offer to fix the old windmill. Sometimes, Evelyn would pause at the edge of the pasture and watch the children running, their laughter rising over the fields. She would rest her hand on Chance's neck, feeling the powerful muscles, the steady heartbeat. In those moments, she understood what Thomas had always tried to tell her. Love was not a finite thing. It grew every time you risked it, every time you gave someone or yourself a second chance. As the fireflies came out and dusk settled over the ranch, Evelyn knew she had finally come home. Not to a place, but to a truth she would carry forward. Forgiveness and hope were not about forgetting the past, but transforming it, making something new and beautiful out of all that had come before. And as the summer wind swept through the tall grass, she whispered, "Thank you, Chance. You saved me too." Evenings on the ranch took on a peaceful rhythm, the kind Evelyn had long believed she'd never find again. As the summer sun slipped behind the hills, the land blushed with gold and lavender. Children's laughter faded into the distance, replaced by the soft lowing of cattle and the distant song of crickets. The old house, once so lonely, now glowed with warm lamplight, windows open to let in the scent of hay and honeysuckle. Chance grazed contentedly in the pasture, his dark coat shining in the twilight, the living symbol of all the hope and hard-won lessons Evelyn had gathered over the past months. When she whistled from the porch, he always lifted his head, ears pricked forward, and trotted over, sometimes at a run, as if he could barely contain his joy. Each evening, she sat on the weathered wooden steps, playing a slow, sweet tune on Thomas's harmonica, letting the music drift across the fields. Tonight, as the day melted into night, Evelyn's heart was full. She watched Chance settle beside her on the other side of the fence, the two of them bathed in the quiet glow of dusk. It was a scene she could never have imagined during those bleak, hopeless days after Thomas died, a scene that felt now like a miracle. She leaned back, gazing at the endless sky, her fingers still idly tracing the worn grooves of the harmonica. The memories of grief no longer stung. They had become soft, even comforting. She understood now that pain never really disappeared. It changed shape, changed weight, and, if you let it, it could teach you the deepest kind of strength. As the first stars appeared, Evelyn thought about all that had changed. She'd rescued Chance, but in truth, he'd rescued her. He had led her back into the world, back into her own heart. The ranch was thriving again, the horses were healthy, the garden bursting with green, and most importantly, the place was filled with laughter and life. Neighbors, friends, and children gathered every week, sometimes for lessons, sometimes just to share stories or help with chores. Evelyn had become the keeper of the ranch's new spirit, always quick with encouragement, gentle wisdom, and a cup of strong coffee for anyone in need. She shared the lessons she'd learned, about grief, about forgiveness, about the courage it took to love again. On this particular evening, a group of children sat around Evelyn on the porch, fireflies swirling in the warm air. Molly and Eli leaned against her knees, tired from a day of riding. The other children listened with wide eyes as she spoke, her voice soft but certain. "You know," she began, "pain never really goes away. It changes, and so do we. Sometimes the hard things in life are what teach us the most important lessons: how to forgive, how to hope, how to start again." Molly looked up at her, curiosity in her eyes. "How do you know when you've forgiven someone?" Evelyn thought for a moment, listening to the night. "I think forgiveness is when you stop wishing things had been different, and you start finding beauty in what is, right here, right now. It's letting go, not of love or memories, but of anger, fear, and regret. It's choosing to live, even with the scars." The children were quiet for a moment. Then Eli said, "And second chances?" Evelyn smiled, her gaze drifting to Chance, who watched them with patient eyes. "Second chances aren't about forgetting what hurt us. They're about honoring the past and daring to live again anyway. It means looking at what's broken, not with judgment, but with kindness, and believing it can still be beautiful. She let the words settle. All around them, the ranch glowed with the soft, golden light of promise. The fireflies blinked in the tall grass, and Chance nickered softly, drawing laughter from the children. Later, as the children drifted home with their families and the ranch grew quiet, Evelyn stayed on the porch, her mind circling back over all she had learned. She thought of Thomas, his letters, his steady faith in her, his whispered promises in the dark. She thought of Chance, fragile and lost, now strong and sure. And she thought of herself, a woman who had been all but broken, who had found the courage to try again. She realized at last that healing wasn't a destination, but a journey, a choice made every single day. It meant embracing both the joy and the sorrow, letting each become a source of wisdom. It meant knowing that scars were not signs of failure, but proof of survival. As the moon rose, Evelyn put away the harmonica and went to stand by the fence, looking out over the land she loved. Chance ambled over, pressing his warm muzzle into her hand. She stroked his forehead, murmuring, "We did it, didn't we? We made it through." She breathed deeply, feeling the cool air fill her lungs, and let herself smile. A real, peaceful smile. Born from every pain and triumph she had ever known. Sitting on the porch as the world hushed around her, Evelyn thought of the journey that had brought her here. The loneliness, the fear, the wild hope that had driven her to save a colt everyone else had given up on. She understood now that every act of kindness, every risk taken for love, every time she'd chosen hope over despair, had shaped her into someone stronger, wiser, more compassionate. She whispered into the dusk, as if Thomas might still be listening. Second chances aren't about forgetting, Thomas. They're about honoring the past, daring to live, and choosing love over fear. The lesson was simple and powerful. Pain is part of life, but so is healing. Loss will always mark us, but it doesn't have to define us. What matters most is the courage to open your heart again, to risk loving, to give and receive forgiveness, and to believe, even when it seems impossible, that new beginnings are always within reach. As the sun finally slipped away and the ranch faded into shadow, Evelyn Carter sat quietly, her scars no longer a burden, but the source of her wisdom and strength. The future, uncertain as it was, glowed with possibility. And so the story closed, not with an ending, but with a beginning. A life lived bravely, a heart healed by hope, and a ranch forever changed by the stubborn, simple magic of a second chance.